today's event. So Jess and I work at Connectable Life. We are the co-owners and co-founders, and the reason Connectable Life came into being was because long before COVID came about, we had a conversation about the importance of healthcare and mental health and wellness and just everything around holistic healthcare, and how we thought, you know, it would be so amazing if it was more accessible to people. And in that conversation, we had this made up platform in our head, and we spent a couple of months formulating it, putting it onto paper. We then went to developers, and so the platform has been created. And yeah, it's just an opportunity for people to see healthcare specialists in the comfort of their own home, in the privacy and convenience of their own home. And hopefully we can try and remove the stigma that mental health care, wellness, and some of these fields still have around them. So that is Connectable Life, and Paula is a life and relationship coach, and today she is going to be educating us on this very important subject of abuse and gender-based violence and domestic abuse. So thank you so much, Paula, for doing this, and thank you so much for educating us.
Thank you, ladies. It's so awesome to be here, but more importantly, to be a part of Connectable Life. I mean, I just love the platform. It's so user-friendly and easy to use, and it's just, yeah, as you said, it's made it so much more accessible for people to get help. You know, and COVID has certainly put a spotlight on mental health and well-being, which for me, I'm so glad about, because in the past, and I'm saying this very respectfully, a lot of organizations would do an annual wellness day and, you know, get people to come in, or service providers to come in and kind of take your blood pressure and prick your finger and check your sugar levels and give you a leaflet and say, there we go, we've educated you on mental health and well-being. But it's personally, I believe that's a tick-the-box exercise, because as we've seen and experienced through COVID, mental health is an everyday thing. And so this platform just really talks to that and meets that need. And really congrats to you ladies for coming up with this great platform and idea, and for letting me be a part of it.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Paula. Yeah, I just want to also add that obviously COVID has been horrific for a lot of reasons. But one of the sort of things that we can take from it is that in forcing people to stay at home and to just shut down for even just a short bit, it's forced us to look around us and just reevaluate. And I think pre-COVID, people had all the same issues, but on a daily basis, they were able to run away from them. They could go to work, they could go to a bar, they could go to a friend, whatever it was, to escape whatever it is that they were not dealing with at home. But being forced to stay at home has sort of forced people to look around, acknowledge what's going on, and to actually reach out for help. I think one of the things that we've sort of noticed during this time is that most requests or cries for help have been relationship or family units, and not necessarily for individual counseling. It's been for people that are struggling as a couple or as a family unit. And I think, you know, for the first time in a very long time, people have been forced to actually deal with that, rather than just get up and go to work and escape it, or try and escape it. And then, you know, the cycle sort of continues. But of course, with that, what has really just exploded. I think I saw a statistic the other day that said gender-based violence has increased in South Africa by something like 500%, which is just astronomical. So obviously with all of that, we have had this major increase in gender-based violence. And that's the reason for the webinar today, is to try and put a spotlight on that. And the reason for today's date being that it's the start of the 16 days of activism. So that is why we are here today, to just try and do our bit in raising awareness and reaching out and telling people that they're not alone, and that there's people out there, and all they need to do is click a button, really. So thanks, Paula, very much for being here, and everybody else as well. And And Stace, I think you've got the first question.
Yes. So Paula, I understand that abuse often follows a cycle. Can you please run us through how that cycle actually works?
Well, so generally when a relationship or a couple starts off, the first sort of stage of the typical relationship cycle that we talk about, that all couples go through, is what we call the honeymoon romantic phase. And that kind of, depending on the dynamics of the couple and the relationship, it can last anything from 3 months up to sort of 18 months, sometimes even 2 years. I've had couples that I've worked with where 2 years down the line and they're still in love with each other. And so every relationship is different. And in that honeymoon romantic phase, there's so much going on inside of us from a chemical balance in terms of dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, adrenaline, which gives us that in love feeling. And in that stage, we're so caught up with the person that we're in love with this partner. And we only see the good things because it's in that phase where we're still on our best behavior. We're still trying to impress. We're still trying to get that person to, fall in love with us, want to be with us, accept us. And research has shown that in love feeling can be similar to that of being an addict. And as we know with addicts, when they're on a high, it's unsustainable, which is why addicts keep going back for their fix. So that's when it comes to relationships, it's unrealistic to expect to be in love all of the time, because as we get further and further into our relationship and more comfortable with each other, our real self or true self starts coming out and we get more comfortable. So we kind of, we stop making an effort. We get into a routine, and a routine can become a rut, and a rut can become complacency. And couples can eventually, over time, when we move into the next relationship, the phase of the relationship cycle, which is the power struggle phase, that's where couples can, majority of the time they get stuck in that phase, and couples can start growing distant and growing apart instead of making each other in their relationship a priority. And that's when toxic things, toxic behaviors or cycles can start coming out to play. Now, obviously, it depends because every relationship is different, so there's no one size fits all. But abuse can be in all forms and shapes and sizes. And it's about understanding what is healthy behavior and what is not healthy behavior when it comes to a relationship and when it comes to you and your partner first and foremost, but then also family dynamics as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Paula. I know also the sort of the frustrating thing about abuse sometimes is that the relationship, like you say, it's not always doom and gloom. You sort of have this image in your head that an abusive relationship will be abusive all the time, and why can the person not just see it and do something to get out of it? But with, as you mentioned, this cycle that the relationship sort of goes through, because it's circular, it moves around. So as soon as things get so bad, they also get so good, which makes it so difficult to decipher, like, is this just a fight, or is this now unhealthy? So obviously conflict in relationships is inevitable. It's going to happen. There's nothing that we can do to avoid it. We all have different minds, hearts, and opinions. So how do we know when we have gone from a state of disagreement, or just, your everyday fights that everybody is going to have that are normal and need to be normalized? How do we know when that has now turned into abuse?
So I think that some of the red flags or the red signs to start looking out for is if you are constantly feeling anxious or walking on eggshells, or you're trying to keep the peace and not rock the boat because you don't want things to flare up in your relationship. If you are constantly fighting all the time. So a healthy relationship, and I think this is where perceptions come in. And when we think of healthy relationships, we often think of, we're going to live happily ever after, we're going to love each other, we're never going to fight, we're going to agree on everything, we're going to do everything together, just like we kind of read about it in the fairy tale books and what we see in the movies. But that's why it's in the fairy tale books and the movies, right? Because it's unrealistic. As you said, Every relationship has conflict, and conflict can be as simple as you and I disagree on a small little thing. We have a difference of opinion. Or it could be as simple as, well, you like bananas and I like mangoes. That's a disagreement. It can be constant. But when it starts getting toxic in terms of the naming, blaming, shaming, criticizing, fault-finding, judging, and then we need to look at the different kinds of abuse, because when we talk about gender-based violence, we often associate it with physical violence, and we associate it with male-on-female violence. We don't think about the female-on-male violence, because it does happen, and we don't think about the mental, emotional abuse and the financial abuse. And those kinds of, because they are so much more subtle and unseen as someone that is, physically being, exposed to physical abuse, where there's bruises or marks or evidence, so to speak. And often those are, we try to cover those up because of the stigma attached to being in an abusive situation, the shame, the guilt, all of those things. I think the first thing is look at those red flags and go, how am I feeling? And am I ashamed to face it and confront it? Do I not want to tell my family and my friends? Am I trying to keep it hidden? Because those are red flags that there's something going on. If it's a normal fight and argument, yes, we have it. But when you're trying to keep it hidden and not tell anybody about it, or don't want to be exposed, then that's a red flag for me.
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks, Paula. You mentioned, I just want to ask you about the financial abuse. I think, financial abuse, I think it's way, way, way more prevalent than anyone thinks. And I think particularly during COVID and the financial sort of strain that has had on families and homes and, everyone's, from a societal level to country to world over. I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit about that. And I know, like, during COVID, there's been households with no money at all, or households with one income. But generally speaking, there has been less financial income than homes and families are used to. And I think that has also, impacted the level of abuse that's been taking place as well. And again, like you say, it's not necessarily a punch to the face. It's a small little comment about, you eating because of me, or, small little comments like that. I don't know if you want to just touch on that financial abuse section.
Yeah, I mean, so as you said, a lot of households have been impacted financially. But financial abuse is more around where one partner controls the money and the way that the money will be used or spent, or the way that money will be accessed. So let's use a typical or simple example, and I'm generalizing here, but, stay-at-home moms who, their job, and it is a very full-time job, is to take care of the house and the household and make sure that everything runs smoothly and take care of the kids. And they're given a monthly allowance, or they're given grocery money, or they're given whatever it is, a budget that they have to work within. And at the end of the day or the end of the month, they have to sit down and account for every single cent that they've spent, and where they've spent it, and how they've spent it, and what they've spent it on. And if they cannot account for a slip or some money or something, it ends up in a huge, big fight, argument. It can get violent, it can get toxic, and it really is, it instills fear. And when you're operating from a place of fear, especially when it comes to money, and having to ask your partner or justify money, that's a form of abuse.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I actually have a friend who ended up divorcing her husband because he was abusing her financially. She would have to pay her over her entire salary at the beginning of the month, and then he would allocate it. And he became so obsessed with their finances and never allowing her to spend anything on herself that it became this giant issue in their lives and ended up destroying their marriage.
Yeah.
But another part of all of that is, does your upbringing influence the way you would see abuse, both as an abuser and as a victim?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's be honest, we're not born abusers. We learn how to become abusive by what we are exposed to in terms of environments. And I'm not talking about in extreme cases where there is a psychological diagnosis or disorder like a psychopath, for example. I'm talking generally. So we're not born abusers. Think of it as smoking cigarettes. When we're born, we're not born smoking cigarettes. We learn how to smoke cigarettes. And it's the same with abusive behaviors. We learn it by the environment that we are exposed to. And our primary environment is our home and our primary caregivers, whoever that may be, because that can be different. So in general situations, primary caregivers is mother and father. They could be other, depending on the environment. So for example, step parents, it could be another caregiver, it could be an older sibling, it could be a grandparent. So whoever your primary caregivers are that you are exposed to. And that's where we first start experiencing what relationships are about, what they like, what they feel like, and how we experience them. And then as we grow and develop, there are other environments that we are exposed to where we can learn abusive behavior or abusive traits. So from a society point of view, you could get involved with I call it the circles of influence. So for example, friendship groups or forums or clubs or associations that we belong to, where we can be exposed to this kind of behavior, and we can learn these traits and behaviors and then bring it back into our own personal environments.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Paula. Paula, how would we identify, it's probably quite a broad question to answer, because like you say, every person is different and every relationship is different, and there's so many factors that come into play. So it does make it so difficult. But simply put, how would we identify a victim of abuse? The sort of telltale signs of a victim, both in ourselves as well as in somebody else.
So yeah, there's a couple of things. If you know, so let's say it's a friend of yours, you know them quite well, and you see a change in their behavior, either withdrawing, becoming less of the person that they used to be. So for example, shut down, they don't share as much as they used to, they kind of cut conversation short when it starts getting to a personal nature, they don't want to go out and socialize anymore, or when they are in social situations, they're constantly looking to their partner for either affirmation or permission to speak or engage, that they seem very anxious and on edge. For example, if they're out without their partner and they're constantly kind of checking their phone or expecting the partner to call up, or the partner's constantly calling and checking up on them, those are some of the signs. Also, in terms of how partners react with each other. So if you see a partner that is, constantly belittling, shaming, attacking, fault finding, but putting them down in front of others, those are some signs of abusive behavior. Or they get to that point where they ask for help and they constantly I call it the breakup makeup. They move out of home, move in with a friend, they want to walk away, but then they keep going back. And it's that repetitive makeup, breakup, and going back. And research shows, and I recall, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's up to 11 times that a victim can go back to that abusive environment before they finally leave or find the courage, or there's a life-defining moment. Either their life has been in jeopardy, or someone has stepped in and actually helped them and supported them and given them the courage to leave that abusive environment.
Sure, it really is. Amazing. It's frightening. And then obviously on the flip side, how would we, again, broad question, but how would we identify the abuser? And again, maybe people are trying to question their own behavior and their own sort of belief systems and role in their relationship. So the abuser in both ourselves and obviously in another person.
Yeah, and I think this is where, a lot of the gender-based violence campaigns to date have been aimed at the victims and not so much as the perpetrators, and helping victims seek help and reach out and leave or escape the environment and places of safety. But very little gender-based violence campaigns that I have seen or am aware of locally and globally talk to the perpetrator themselves. So some of the signs to look out for is if you're constantly angry and reactive and defensive, if you are aggressive, if you physically lash out at your partner, whether it's grabbing them around the arm, whether it's slapping them, whether it's punching them, kicking them, whether you completely shut your partner down and dominate them. And I'm talking both from a relationship engagement conversation point of view, but then also that goes that one step deeper from a physical sexual perspective, where there is that sort of mentality, and I'm generalizing here, that it's my partner, and therefore they need to do what I tell them to do, or be submissive, or it's my right, and therefore I can take what I want and I can do what I want.
And I think the scary thing is, it would take so much for a person to admit those things. It will take a very courageous person to actually look in the mirror and say, you know what, I think I might actually be the perpetrator here. So, what can we do as people, as a society, to, you mentioned the fact that most campaigns revolve around the victim. Is there anything that we could do more to sort of raise more awareness around the perpetrator, to open people's eyes to that, to start to look at themselves rather than other people? Yeah.
I think this is where, as individuals, as communities, as organizations, as society or nation at large, we need to start making it okay to speak up and speak out from both perspectives, from a victim perspective and from a perpetrator perspective. And this is why we need to have these conversations all the time, not just, and again, I say this respectfully, waiting for once a year when the 16 Days of Activism campaign comes out. Abuse happens every day in our environments, within our homes, within our friends, our families, etc., our colleagues. It happens. And we need to start removing that stigma of the shame and the embarrassment, and making it okay for people to speak up and speak out and seek help and get help. A lot of work and focus is done from a victim perspective in terms of the months and potentially even years of therapy that they need to go through to work through that trauma that they have experienced. And we need to look at doing similar and running similar campaigns for perpetrators, where it's not just, and again, I say this respectfully because I'm generalizing, send them off to anger management classes. They really need to go through a whole self-reflection therapy, discovery of why am I doing this, why am I behaving this way, what is the feedback that I'm getting, not only from the victim that I'm interacting and engaging with, but there's been patterns throughout my life that I've been exposed to that potentially I have not, I'm not aware of, I'm in denial of, all of those things. And look at my patterns of my own behavior, and that's where it starts with self-awareness and being willing to put my hand up and go, okay, you know what, maybe I need some help. Maybe I also have some issues in my life that I need to start addressing.
And I think, I love that. And I think that's where the workplace and businesses and corporates, and that's where they don't realize the power they have to actually make change in the world. Because, all the employee wellness programs they're getting a lot more recognition than they used to, and it's fantastic. But it's through those programs that people are almost forced to self-reflect and answer questions and look at their own lives, and through that realize that actually I might be the problem. And we've got a very good friend who he was always very, very, very angry. And he obviously never admitted it, and he never thought it was a problem. And then through an employee wellness program, they were forced to see a psychologist. And he ended up going for 10 sessions after that, and he is literally a changed person. But had the workplace not had that employee wellness program in place, he would probably still be angry today. So I think there's a huge gap there for the workplace to also just step in and do their bit in terms of these self-empowerment and mainly just self-awareness questionnaires and just self-reflection to try and make people happier. Because if you're happier, then your relationship will be happier, and your workplace, your society, your home, your everything, it sort of boils over. So thanks, Paula.
Yes, I agree, absolutely. And I see here Stephanie has written 2 questions, one of which you, I believe, have answered, but it's do perpetrators have the insights and self-awareness to notice their behavior, which I think you've already said. And she went on and said, are there programs already up and running for the perpetrators? Do EAP opportunities exist?
So first of all, hello Stephanie, so awesome to have you here joining us. It's been a while since I've seen you and we've caught up. So yeah, perpetrators, I think again it depends, and so then from a clinical diagnosis perspective, if someone is diagnosed, for example, as a psychopath or a narcissist, then they potentially won't have that awareness around self in terms of their behavior because of that whole psychology sort of aspect and that they need to go through. Outside of those extreme cases, I'm generalizing in terms of most perpetrators would have some kind of feedback either from the victim themselves or others around them, either growing up through their life. And it's about really, I think, having the courage to speak up. And this is where stereotyping and labeling comes in. And again, I'm generalizing as far as men are concerned. Men must be tough, men must be strong, men mustn't show emotion, it's a weakness. Men are the providers, the protectors, all those kind of things. It is a generational thing. We are starting to see with the younger generations coming through that there is a slight difference in terms of perspective and equality and being sort of metro males and that kind of thing, or the modern man, so to speak. But also I think as we've evolved in terms of modern society and we are talking about these topics more and more and are being more open about it, it is starting to make it more okay. It's also around, how the modern man is being seen. So, for example, male grooming has been a whole new sort of area that's evolved, and that it makes it okay for men to now, embrace themselves wholly and holistically and do stuff like that. In terms of programs, there are already some programs that are up and running. So first of all, from a male perspective, there are programs and initiatives like, for example, the Mankind Project that focuses on men. I've been running men's programs for the last 6 years around personal growth and development. There are a few others out there that I know run programs specifically for men and personal growth and development. And then as far as EAP opportunities exist, there are some corporates that are now really taking a proactive stance to include gender-based violence training, and I'm involved with some of them, because employers have realized that some employees are not safe at home, working from home, and therefore, and it's a very tricky, complex situation, because especially in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, employers are responsible for providing a safe working environment for employees. But now with employees working from home, where does that role and responsibility lie in terms of the safe environment? Is it the employee because they're in a toxic situation, or is it the employer because they are forcing employees to work from home because of COVID right now? And so there is a big awareness, and quite a few companies now are starting to be more proactive in including GBV training specifically under the EAP programs that they have.
That's amazing. Wow, it's so wonderful that everybody is starting to come on board a little bit more, and there's all this incredible education around these subjects. So Paula, what would you suggest victims do and should do to try and get out of an abusive situation?
Yeah, that's always a tough one, because victims will leave when they want to leave or when they are ready to leave. And so it's a process and it's a journey. And the first thing is obviously becoming aware of and really sort of distinguishing between, is it really abusive behavior, or is it just, we've hit a speed bump? As that's what I call them, speed bumps, when we've had a conflict and a disagreement and perhaps we've crossed with each other for 2 days, But so first of all, identifying the behaviors, and is it really abusive behavior or not? If it is abusive behavior, then yes, put an emergency or escape plan in place. And this is where you can, if you can't reach out for help through your company's EAP program or through any of the foundation of organizations out there, for example, Lifeline and SADAG and all the others that help victims, turning to friends and family, and if they can help you. But that exit emergency plan is, have a bag packed that's ready, that if you need to leave, you can grab that bag and you can run. And I'm talking extreme cases here or situations. And in that bag, have all the important documents that you need, like your driver's license, your ID, your passport, your whatever, and some money, and potentially even have a spare cell phone that's charged, got airtime in it with emergency contact numbers in. You can also download apps on your phone, like the Normala app and the Gardening app, if it comes to that. But I think also, especially, and I'm talking now where narcissistic behavior comes in, when you start doubting yourself and you start questioning yourself in terms of, is it me? Because, this can be so much manipulation being done in a toxic environment that you can, it's almost made out that it's your fault and you deserved it, and no, you're going crazy, and no, you're overreacting. And it's really around helping you keep a journal or documenting, things to help you make sense of it all and be very clear. And especially if you're going for therapy and working through these things around, was it really me? Did I do all of these things, or was it a completely different perspective? And that it's a journey and it's a process, and that depending on how long you've been in this environment, it could be years of therapy. And so to be gentle and kind on yourself in the process, and that, first of all, your own personal safety and wellness is your first priority. And then secondly, if you have children, their safety and wellness and well-being is your second priority.
Wow, amazing. Thank you. I see here Kalina has written that there's an organization called Tears that helps victims leave, and she's put it's www.tears.co.za. I also want to know, though, what you mentioned EAP program from Stephanie. What is an EAP program?
So EAP is simply Employee Assistance Program. So it's another name for Employee Wellness Program or Employee Wellbeing, depending on what organizations call it, and also depending on which service providers they use. So, for example, iCares is one of them. The banks have some of their own internal through their medical aid schemes, so like Discovery and BankMed, etc.
Okay, good to know. Thank you so much. Yeah, amazing.
Awesome. And then Paula, you mentioned if you've got family and friends to reach out to, reach out to them, have that emergency exit plan. What do you do as a family member or a friend where you can so blatantly see an abusive relationship? Firstly, is there anything that you can do as a family member or a friend? And secondly, if so, what is that?
Yeah, and it's always difficult, as a loved one, see someone go through this, and you want to step in and you want to help, and you can see it so clearly that it's an abusive environment or abusive situation, and the natural thing is to want to go in and save or rescue or fix, but unfortunately the reality is it's not your journey, it's not your relationship. You can try and help that person leave, but as I said, depending on the type of situation, potentially the odds of them going back again and again is very real. So it's around helping them find a safe space to speak up and speak out. It's providing and being a support and being there for them until they are ready to take those steps themselves to leave or to go for therapy, take care of themselves and keep themselves safe. It's also about understanding that they may not be ready to leave, and there's nothing that you can do about that. But keep reminding them that, what they're going through is not healthy in terms of what a healthy relationship looks like. It's not a healthy partner behavior, and they shouldn't have to live a life of being in fear or constantly on guard or constantly having to be on eggshells and watch what they do or say. And that you're always there for them. You're willing to help and support and be there, and even go with them and take them to therapy or a place where they can get professional help if need be.
And then Paula, with the, you said that sometimes they can go back 11 times before they actually leave. it obviously gets so bad that they eventually pluck up the courage to get up and to go. What is it that then draws them back? Because they obviously had a moment of clarity where they realized that this is not right and that they need out. So what is it that then draws them back those 11 times?
It depends on the severity of the environment and that, but so things like codependent relationships. It could also, have got to a point in terms of the mental and emotional state or frame of mind, in terms of that they really do genuinely believe that they can't live without this person, they are nothing without this person, that they really do love this person. It's called Stockholm Syndrome, and where you actually do fall in love with your abuser and you genuinely believe that they love you. And, depending on the cycle of abuse and how long it goes on, you get so caught up in it that it is difficult to leave. And that's where it really does help to get professional help.
Yeah. And I think people also just get scared to be alone and to sit with all of that alone. I see Stephanie has a question here. What do you suggest if a victim leaves but the partner keeps the children and is prevented from seeing the children? There is a legal process, but narcissists can keep this process going for years.
Yeah, and that's that. When you are dealing with those extremes, you can obviously go the legal route in terms of but it doesn't mean that the perpetrator is going to adhere to those things. So things like protection orders. It can be a long, ongoing legal battle to try and get the kids, back with you. The only time, in instances where children are taken away from a mother, is if they have, there's some kind of proof or evidence that they're an unfit mother. But generally, in most instances, children will go to the mother, and then there's the whole custody in terms of 50% joint custody or whatever it might be. But yeah, protection orders and things like that, and I've heard of cases and where people have had to change their numbers and their addresses, and we've even moved countries to get away from perpetrators. It can be hugely traumatic, and it can take years of being in that space and the impact on you mentally and emotionally. So there's no easy answer to that kind of a situation, unfortunately. And the sad thing here is the kids become the innocent victims because they're caught in the middle of all of this, and they get exposed to a toxic, abusive environment, which obviously affects their mental well-being as well.
Yeah, shame.
I see here Kalina has asked if she can make some recommendations and ask some questions. So should we wait till the Q&A, or is it all right if
we're not too far away from the Q&A, and then we will open up there, I think.
Okay.
Thanks, Kalina. So Paula, today's webinar was entitled Busting the Myths. And I think therein lies a large portion of the problem, is that there are these beliefs out there, these belief systems, and it's so difficult to crack a belief system, because if that's something you believe, why would you change it? And during my years as a high school teacher, I also taught life orientation to grade 10, 11, and 12 learners, and it obviously opened up a lot of these sort of conversations, which is a great space to have them. But I really did realize in those conversations that how many myths are out there. And, I can call it a myth because I see the truth in it. But for a lot of these learners, it is their belief system. That is what they believe. So a couple of those was, we would get onto, and I'm talking predominantly about the sexual abuse, we would get onto the topic of rape. And if I posed the question, can a husband rape a wife? Can rape occur in a marriage? The class would start laughing, and they would actually find it funny that rape can, and I suppose there's also just a little bit of immaturity amongst that as well. But when it came down to the real conversation, there was this belief that once you're married, it belongs to you. sex belongs to you, and when you want it, you will have it. And I would even take it a step further and say, okay, so if a husband picks up a cricket bat and smashes his wife in the head, and she's black and blue, so you can actually see it now, would you consider that physical abuse? And they would say, yes, of course, that's horrendous. You can't do that. And then we would break down the definition of sexual abuse. And one evening, a wife says no, she doesn't want to do anything. The husband continues. Is that now considered rape? And half the class would sort of sway to, okay, yes, maybe. But there were always those that were very vehement in the fact that no, rape cannot exist within a marriage because it's mine.
Yeah, that is one of the myths, in that if it's not consensual, it is considered rape. And if your wife is not in the mood and doesn't want to, and you force yourself on her, that is the equivalent to rape. And one of the other myths is that men can't be raped, and men can be raped. And I have worked with some men where that has been the case, and that myth is that, oh, but you're a man and you're stronger, and how can you let a woman rape you, and all these kind of things, and it happens. And that's these myths that we have to dispel. Is that so? The first myth is when we hear gender-based violence, we think physical violence, and we associate it with male on female. We don't think about female on male. And we also don't think about abuse in the LGBTQI sector and community because it happens across the spectrum. We also think that it only happens at home, and it happens in the workplace as well. Things like sexual harassment and sexual misconduct, and where people have been raped in the workplace as well. Even out in society, social situations, for example, the rape drug, that a lot of where drinks get spiked. And then there is all the other types of abuse that I've mentioned. So it's not just physical abuse. It is also the mental, emotional, the verbal, and then the financial abuse as well. So abuse is abuse. And any form of abuse should not be condoned whatsoever. And that's where it can become a little bit more tricky or complex when we start talking, and I'm saying this respectfully, in terms of cultural nuances, and that the way we've grown up, and this is our culture, or this is our beliefs, or this is our traditions. And that, sometimes those beliefs or those things are difficult to get our heads around and go, but it's not acceptable. But if you go in terms of the Constitutional Act and rights, and I think I'm glad that Will is on here because he can maybe give a bit of a legal perspective, in that it goes against our basic constitutional right and humankind right, in that no one of any circumstance, culture, norm deserves to be abused, and there are consequences for that.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. I also just wanted to add another sort of myth to it, that abuse is inflicted by strangers. You watch a movie or you watch a series or whatever it is, and it's that bar scenario where you go to the bar and the drink is spiked, and the next thing you wake up and you don't know what's happened to you and you've been sexually abused. But I think the sad reality is that most cases of abuse, be it sexual, physical, emotional, financial, whatever it may be, it's from people closest to you, people that you're supposed to be able to trust, people that you love and you think love you, your family members, and very, very often family friends, where you send your child to a very close family friend's house for the night, and the next thing, horrific things happen. So that's really the sad reality, is that we think we need to protect ourselves from strangers, but it's those that are supposed to be nearest and dearest that 9 times out of 10 are inflicting this abuse. So I think the sort of question is, what do we do to erase these myths, or to try and change these age-old belief systems? And I think the reason why I'm bringing up the belief systems on a GBV webinar is because 9 times out of 10, the belief systems are beliefs about gender roles and what is expected of a woman versus a man, and that is used as you mentioned earlier, in a power struggle, and the power struggle becomes abuse. So what do we do to try and eliminate this?
I think, first of all, we need to keep having more conversations like this to raise awareness, and we need to have conversations in the home around, the gender differences and equality. And it needs to start with educating our girl child and boy child around what is healthy behavior, what's abusive behavior. We need to educate girls in terms of how to be assertive and stand up for themselves and put down a very assertive no, and also speak out to their primary caregivers if it's not one of them or someone that's a person of safety, a place of safety in terms of, that this was what I experienced, or this is what has happened, or, and make them, that it's okay for them to speak up, because often especially children young age, and I'm not saying it doesn't carry through to adulthood, but they get threatened that if you tell anybody, you're going to get into trouble. It starts with that kind of, and then that instills the fear, and they keep quiet about it. In my own personal experience, I experienced sexual abuse at a young age. It was from about between age 9 and 12. And, it's someone close to you. It's a family friend or a neighbor or somebody that you know. And that's how it starts. But we also need to educate our boy children in terms of what is abusive behavior, what is acceptable, not acceptable, and how we raise our children. And then also in terms of dads, girls, the first real love relationship that a girl has in her life is her dad. And how dads interact with mothers and then with daughters themselves versus sons, if they have sons, creates a perspective of what relationships look like, how men behave in relationships, and how men treat women. So, and one of the things we're doing is we're running dads and daughters workshops to help build better relationships between dads and daughters, and bring that awareness from a family perspective. And then we need to have it in communities, places like, for example, churches and other associations and groups and stuff. And then also in the workplace, as part of our employee wellness and well-being, as part of our corporate culture as to what is acceptable and not acceptable. The one corporate that I'm working with, they've taken a very proactive stance, and they've made it a zero tolerance policy. If there is any abuse, it is zero tolerance, and it can be a dismissible offense. And then the campaigns that we run out there, as I said, we shouldn't just wait till once a year and have it when it's an annual campaign. It needs to be an ongoing daily discussion amongst ourselves, our friends, and then we need to be able to call each other out on our behaviors. From a female point of view, from men on men, to say, hey, that's not right. That could be my sister, my mother, my whatever that you're talking about, or could be. And would you like your mother, sister, grandmother, whoever it might be, to be treated in that way? And start making it real.
Amazing. Thanks, Paula. Love that. Stephanie has asked, do you offer training, Paula? Train the trainer.
Definitely, we will be soon. We probably only next year, because some of the programs are in pilot phase, so we're just tweaking it around that. But then absolutely next year, that is part of the plan, is to offer train the trainer around GBV trainings.
Amazing. So talking about, we've touched on the employee wellness section and people working from home, but I mean, really it is the massive reality with COVID, and people have, I mean, I know in my small towns, a lot of organizations have even given up their workspace and have just said to people, either work from home or rent premises somewhere else, but we're giving up this building. When people are working from home, and if there is abuse in their home, I know that you did say, but that from the organization's perspective, what would you suggest organizations can do further and get more involved, from a health and safety side of things?
So I think, first of all, from an occupational health and safety point of view, you need to understand from a legal perspective what are your rights and roles and responsibilities as an organization, and how are you complying those. Then secondly, from a culture point of view, in terms of how seriously do you think GBV is, and how do you want to incorporate it into your existing offerings and support structures? And then how do you communicate that to your staff? And then thirdly, I think from a leadership point of view, as a leader, get to know your people, get to know their situations, create a speak up versus shut up culture, where you make it okay for employees to speak up and speak out. A lot of them don't in the workplace for fear of that stigma that it's going to be, now I'm going to have a target on my back, and it's going to be a career limiting move, and the intimidation and the shame and everything that goes with that. And so we need to create a safe environment in the workplace where people can speak up, where they can get help, where they can be referred to professional services or people to help them, and therapists and stuff like that, and to run gender-based violence training and awareness programs within the organizations as well.
That's amazing. Thank you. I think that's very
I think
powerful.
It really is just awareness, and just opening up these conversations, as you say, every day, and not just once a year. So that's great. Thanks, Paula.
For another quick solution, if you do find that some of your employees are in an abusive situation and you've given up your office space, there are tons of shared co-working spaces out there. Arrange that a person can go to a co-shared working space where they're out of the situation as best as possible, as much as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
Okay.
See, something's come through from Barbara. You mentioned zero tolerance at the workplace. How smart is it, though, to have this at work, as this means the perpetrator may be removed from a certain environment and situation, but then carry on with their abuse elsewhere, perhaps even more so because they feel unfairly dismissed? Could there not be an approach that would also help change a perpetrator's behavior, as in psychological sessions, if that person would like to return to the workplace, or is it about the duty to protect first?
It's a combination of both, Barbara. So the corporate that has done a zero tolerance policy, is part of that is there's GBV training, and they create the awareness in-house, and they address both perpetrators and victims. They have implemented what they call GBV ambassadors. And so definitely it's to try and help the person be rehabilitated, whether it's a victim or a perpetrator. But obviously, if they followed all the legal procedures and processes in terms of internal as what their company policy are, they get to a point where it's zero tolerance.
Amazing.
Thanks,
Paula. Kalina, would you like to turn your video on and make your recommendations or comments, and anybody else as well? Any questions, comments?
Cool. Thank you so much for this discussion. I think it's really important, especially during this time with COVID and where people had to work from home, for example, and a lot of the time the victims were stuck at home with their abusers. So I just wanted to touch on what you were discussing earlier in terms of how victims can get help. So I did a workshop on trauma and sexual violence counseling, and basically, like, the first line of, trying to get help is you need to try and get evidence of the abuse. So even though, according to the law, you need to get a person's permission to record a conversation or record a video thing. If you are being abused, the South African Police Services, the constable that was talking to us, he said, in a case of abuse, it doesn't matter. Just, try and get as much evidence as possible, whether it means recording a conversation, recording a telephone call, keeping evidence of the messages with any, abusive language, just basically trying to build up proof and evidence in order to back you up in terms of getting a protection order. And the lawyers and everything will deal with, the legal issues. But then also, if, for example, with marital rape specifically, or rape in general, because usually, as you said, the rapist or the abuser is usually a friend or a family member. There are these places called the Thuthuzela centers, where they basically facilitate the whole process for the victim. So it's always advisable to either reach out to one of those centers, or if a victim has been raped, I know this can be quite difficult to hear, but they have to go to a government hospital to get a medical assessment using the form. It's called the J88. And that's like the rape kit and everything. Ultimately, it's the victim's decision whether they decide to pursue the case or not. But this J88 form forms a part of the legal whole process. So the victim may not want to, pursue the matter in the future, but they might change their mind. But if this form is essential, and unfortunately with private hospitals, for some reason, the private hospitals don't always follow the protocol. And whenever these types of rape kits or assessments are done at private hospitals, the cases get dismissed because of, procedural failure technicalities. And one of the things is because they didn't go to a public government hospital. So that, I think, is really important for victims of abuse to be made aware of. And then also in terms of the police stations, there's also, unfortunately, cultural difficulties, and sometimes there's secondary victimization. But you're right, I'm talking from the perspective of a woman. So if, for example, the victim is a woman, she has the right to ask for a female officer to speak to get her statement. And she needs to preferably speak to someone from the Family Violence, Child Protection and Sexual Offences Unit. And they deal with all sexual gender-based violence issues. And they also facilitate the process. So I just wanted to add that information, just so that, whoever watches this, that who knows, maybe we might help someone facilitate the process of getting help and getting out of an abusive situation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Paula.
amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's definitely valid if you are wanting to lay charges to have that paper trail, because we all know that if it comes down to he said, she said, that it probably won't go very far, sadly. So definitely great advice there. Thanks so much, Kalina.
Cool.
Does anyone else have any questions
Or
that they would like
comments?
to ask Paula? Will has raised his hand.
Very
you can take
diligent.
your video off if you want to ask. Perfect. We're just waiting. That's wonderful.
Microphone disabled. 1 sec. Can't disable. Okay, well, just wanted to say thanks.
Thank you. So great
Thanks.
that everybody has come on board. Yeah, Lara has also said thank you. Amazing. Yeah.
Shame. Great.
Thank you. Yeah. Laura's written here, our aim is to have adolescents leave impacted and to be able to use the skills to enhance their lives and that of others. Our aim is to create more awareness around GBV, highlighting the unhealthy attitudes and behavior ingrained in society that can contribute to GBV and instill respect for others and gentlemanship. There is currently a lot of support for women, but not much we hear about for boys or men. We want to work with the changing attitudes and behaviors. I have a client at 10. So thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you.
That's awesome, Laura. And I see earlier on, she said that they are running a gender-based violence program for adolescent boys, which they're introducing into high schools.
Oh, amazing.
That's awesome. We need so much more, aimed at boys and men, because they are unfortunately also part of the silent victims, where there's not a lot of work and support being put out there for men. And that's one of the reasons why I've been running a men's program for the last 6 years.
Amazing. Yes,
amazing.
There
Thanks,
definitely
Paula.
needs to be more awareness around that all and around this entire subject, because each one of us needs to know about this, whether for ourselves or a family member, friend, colleague, someone in our circles.
And I see Stephanie says, are there going to be more sessions? Should like to share the links for future. I'm sure there will be.
Yes,
I hope so as well.
We will be in touch, definitely. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. And thank you, Paula, so much for really was amazing. The knowledge that you impart really is always fantastic. We always learn so much from you. And it leaves us fueled to try and make a difference, even if just, in some small way, just change one mindset along the way. And hopefully that one mindset changes another. So thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies, and thank you for everyone and the questions and the input. It's been an awesome morning, and I've loved being part of it with you.
Amazing.
You.
Thank you, and thank you so much to everybody for joining as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.